Welcome to today's talk. We're going to talk about something that is important in a number of respects. It gets into how do you really attract people? How do you interview them? How do you assess them without being able to see them face to face? And it can't help but bleed into how we're working today. We're not just recruiting virtually, but we're working virtually. And so you have issues like retention of your existing people. How do you best operate in a remote environment and keep them engaged, keep them motivated? And that, of course, gets also into issues of onboarding. So we're going to talk about a number of different things. They're all sort of related. They're all around the impact of working in and recruiting and retaining in a virtual environment. We're, 11 months into this now? And so some of what we're going to talk about, you already have. You've already figured that out. You've already been taught this. You have some of this down pat already. Hopefully some of it will be things that you haven't heard before. This is sort of our best practices take based on talking with lots of companies all day long, not just special needs plans, but all kinds of health plans and payers, as well as some digital health companies. So this is our best take on best practices. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about us before we get started, just a quick intro, and then we can get into the meat of the matter. As I mentioned, we're in North Carolina. We're in Wilmington, North Carolina, which is in the southeast corner of the state, if you haven't been. We currently have 16 people. We only do healthcare. We only do permanent placement recruiting. And we are structured in two teams: health plans, obviously, and also digital health companies. We've been doing this for 18 years, and those have been our two specialties the whole time. We do a lot of work with government healthcare plans, both Medicare and Medicaid. And of course, we do work with special needs plans. We've done some work with PPHP, with Liberty Advantage, which is a Wilmington plan here, Longevity, which is some former Florida Blue people. You may know some of them. And so we've got some ideas to share with you that you may find particularly relevant. We're structured beyond just being in two teams. We're also structured along functional verticals. And Cheryl alluded to this before. We generally are placing people at the executive and call it management levels, but in five critical areas, we go up and down the vertical, from the chief down to, let's say, the analyst level. These are areas that most plans tell us they have difficulty finding people and hiring people. Risk adjustment and quality reporting, network contracting, particularly as the whole network dynamics have changed as we've gone from the beat them down adversarial kind of quote unquote negotiations to more of the collegial collaborative negotiations that value-based care requires, the win-win kind of approach. Obviously, you're all sitting on tons and tons of data, and a lot of plans are figuring out what to do with that data, whether it's establishing health economics or medical economics departments. We have somebody here that specializes just in those types of positions. We also have done a lot of work and do a lot of work in payment integrity, fraud, waste, and abuse. And then, as Matthew will tell you, compliance and regulatory affairs. I'm going to introduce my two colleagues, and then we can get further into the program. Matthew, do you want to start off introducing yourself?
Sure. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us. My name is Matthew Legink, and I'm a recruiter specializing in healthcare, compliance, and regulatory affairs.
And I'm Trey Wheelis. I'm our recruiter in the risk adjustment and quality reporting space. So I'll kind of start us off here. So there are, of course, some notable benefits to a virtual hiring market. Probably the easiest to identify is an expanded candidate pool. So once you open up your search, to a virtual or remote environment, you immediately unlock an entirely new world of talent that previously didn't have. There's no longer those geographic restraints or requiring individuals to move across the country for a specific location, which is not always easy to do. You also typically have a quicker hiring process. The candidates you're interviewing don't have to take quite as much PTO. Typically, they're working from home already. It's usually only an hour or so to conduct an interview, so they don't have to take off the entire afternoon or multiple days if a flyout's required. And in addition to greater accessibility of the candidates that you're interviewing, you also have much easier access to people on your own team, any peers, executives, hiring managers, anybody you want to bring in on this interview process. Much easier to coordinate schedules in this environment. And this overall is going to enhance the candidate's experience. It's much easier and quicker to get the candidate feedback on how the interview went. Typically, also, it's a lot shorter in coming to a decision and being able to, make a selection on the candidate you want to fulfill the job. But it's also worth noting your competition's also moving quickly. So once we've identified a position, we want to start our recruiting. Probably the first thing you want to ask yourself, is this position going to remain remote in a post-COVID environment? If the answer is yes, then all those benefits hold true. You get the bigger candidate pool. You're not going to have the relocation costs associated with anything. Now, if the answer is no or maybe, definitely want to make sure everybody's on the same page and comfortable with that change, especially if the answer is maybe, and you're not quite sure yet what the future looks like for this specific position. Is the candidate going to even be okay with working on site? Does their timelines align, with what they feel comfortable with and what your company's looking to, as far as bringing candidates or people back to work face to face? And of course, for the time being, is the candidate going to be comfortable with the technology, and what's their work from home environment look like? As we know, everybody's home life's a little bit different, especially during these times. Things can be quite hectic. Some people, have children, they're homeschooling, spouses, other people living in the house, also working from home. So you just want to make sure everybody's, in an environment that they can remain productive. And then, of course, is the position going to, require any travel? What's that travel going to look like post-COVID? Is that something they're okay with? So this is just something you want to have clear expectations for. So once you have your position, probably the most important part to any recruiting process, virtual or not, is to develop a tight spec. And you want to share that spec with all the interviewers or anybody involved in the interview process. And the reason we say that is this is going to create an unbiased lens through which you can view all candidates. Okay, it's going to allow you to compare apples to apples. It's going to help eliminate any of those unnecessary rejections of, I didn't like this guy. Why not? I didn't get the right feel for him. It takes out all those entirely and allows you to quantifiably and aggressively compare everybody. It's also a good idea to share best practices with both the candidates and your team. And it's also important to remind your team, look, we're recruiting talent here as well. So it's important for them to come and impress the candidate as well. We are in a much relaxed environment. Okay. Everybody's working from home. We might not be dressing quite as professionally, sitting at our desk from home, conducting our Zoom meetings all day. So just might be worth reiterating that. This is a given now, but it's also worth mentioning again. Make sure you have appropriate background, lighting, microphones working, and to that end, test the technology. Something that some of our clients have done that we recommend is to have a backup plan in play. So take Zoom invitations, for example. Anytime you send out a Zoom invitation, there's the option to call in and conduct the meeting over the phone. So it might be a good idea to put a note in the invitation of, should any difficulties arise, you can't, your Wi-Fi is not working, whatever the case may be, the default should be to call in and conduct that over the phone. As well as when the interview starts, things happen, people get booted out, can't get right back into the interview. So might be worth making a note of, look, if anything happens, just call in, or we'll finish it up over the phone. This, of course, still is an interview. Eye contact still important. So the way we do that today, of course, look into the camera, not the screen. And in a virtual interview setting, it's a good idea to start with introductions. So when you're in that face-to-face world, there's usually a few minutes you have of that, meet and greet, handshake, break the ice period. We don't necessarily have that these days. So always set aside a couple of minutes to, have that brief introduction, informal period. It'll help relax the candidates, because it can be quite nerve-wracking, especially if it's a panel interview. And last but not least, share the dress code with both the candidates and the team. As we mentioned, different times now, everybody's working from home. So it's always a good idea to set clear expectations for that.
In the true spirit of COVID and remote work, I was tempted to start talking on mute mode. You've certainly experienced that before, but I think our friends on the phones might not quite get that. So I'll get right into it. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the legal concerns, if you will. If you're recording a call, a video session like we're doing here, and it's very valuable to go back and listen to how a candidate may have answered a question or asked a question, get the candidate's consent up front. Very easy to do, just call their attention to it. And of course, if they're not familiar, not comfortable with it, then don't do it if you can avoid that. Other things that you want to think about, and this really kind of all falls into the category of being in tune with your legal department, whether it's in-house or whether it's outside counsel. Make sure you're doing things according to the way that your legal counsel would advise. So for example, there's still, here we are 11 months later, and there's still so much uncertainty. When is this going to open up? What's it going to look like? How much in person, how much on-site work will there be? You're interviewing a candidate now for a job. If you think that there will be on-site work for that role for that candidate, is it okay to insist on that? Some companies are doing face-to-face interviews now. They're doing the screening through video, but they're doing some face-to-face interviews. Not many, but some are. Is that okay? Is it okay to pass on somebody because he or she is not comfortable with either of those things? And if and when you do open up, what about COVID testing? Is that okay? Does legal feel that's an okay thing to do? For example, taking temperatures. As I said in the beginning, when you start talking about remote recruiting, it gets into other areas. One of the areas that it gets into, of course, is onboarding. Think of a candidate that's thinking about changing jobs, going to a new company, a new organization. That's scary enough as it is sometimes. But to do that from my living room, that could be real scary. Now, some people find it as change is good, change is exciting, but not everybody's that way. And a lot of people find it unnerving. So anything that you can do to hold their hands, to make them feel more comfortable throughout the process will help them. And we'll talk more about that. But if you have a good, empathetic onboarding program, bring that into the interview. Let the candidate know, hey, we're not just going to hire you and then give you stuff to work on, but we're going to figuratively hold your hand. We're going to make sure that you're assimilated into the organization in a way that is calm and in a way that is helpful. We'll have lots of tools and lots of help available to you, so don't worry about it. Let them have a clear expectation of what the first few weeks are going to look like. The tools you might share, the links, what kind of help is available if they have trouble with their computer or with the video. Share with them internal and external contact lists if you can, and kind of what the lay of the landscape is. And then an org chart, of course, is taking that to another degree. One of the things, as Trey talked about earlier, is you can now have greater access to people that otherwise might not have been available. So take advantage of that. Have more people available to welcome the new hire. Maybe virtual lunches with either peers or management people, executives, leaders of the organization. All this stuff, taken collectively, will help somebody feel much more comfortable, much more at home, much more part of the team. So talk about that in the interview so that they know what is coming.
So our role as search consultants is to be in tune with the hiring market and over the last 11 months, there's been some common trends from the candidates that we speak to as far as things that they may not be happy with, or why they are happy in their current role and not looking to seek a new one. We find there's always reason that someone takes our call. This was true before the pandemic and is still true today. Some people are truly always open to hearing about new opportunities, but usually someone has reason as to either why they're very happy and don't even want to consider anything, or why they are looking for a new opportunity. And leadership is something that can help sway them either way. The events of the last year have put us all in this unique position where we're all experiencing the same challenges of leading remotely. Many aspects are still the same as they were before in a traditional office setting, but now some are more intentional or need to be emphasized a little bit more. Prime example of this is safety. You never really had to say before, hey, you shouldn't risk your life to come to the office for this meeting. But now that's something that we have to be intentional about. Nothing will have a candidate looking quicker than someone that doesn't feel like their safety is being taken seriously. And as offices open back up, as we kind of have this light at the end of the tunnel with the vaccine deployment, be conservative in this effort and check in with your employees and make sure that they're okay with it. It can be tough to speak up in a group setting when that announcement might be made, but take the time to reach out and say, hey, are you okay with this? Because again, you may never know what their situation is. They may have elderly relatives that they're staying with at home that might be at risk. And so you just want to check in, make sure that they're good with that. Like I mentioned, leadership traits were always important, but some have to now be more intentional. And leadership has always been about visibility. It's really tough nowadays to follow and trust someone that you can't see. Now, before, the brick and mortar setting would provide this visibility for you, and it was always implied. And many interactions and updates on projects or other things you're working on would be via conversation. You could walk across the hallway or turn to the person next to you and say, hey, do you have a few minutes to answer a couple questions on this thing? But now a lot of our interaction is written and digital. So previous characteristics of a leader might be someone with big picture mentality who's really charismatic and extroverted. And these things are still important, but with the reduction of face-to-face interaction, diligence and organization and dependability have become more important. Candidates and employees feel frustrated when they can't rely on their leadership to reply to an email in a timely manner. And they may lose important updates if they aren't being diligent with their communication electronically. So being timely and diligent in your written communication will provide current employees and candidates confidence in your leadership in the direction of the organization, as well as the ability to do their own job. With both current and new employees, it's important to set clear expectations of what the work from home model looks like at your organization. In a traditional setting, you might not be at your desk from 8 to 5 or whatever hours you work at all times. You could be pulled into a meeting, you could be off at lunch or on a bathroom break, and or you could even be trying to find someone to answer a question that you have. So before, you wouldn't necessarily come back to your desk and have a notification on your computer, missed call from Jim Gibson. And so you have to understand that there's a certain anxiety that comes with that. If you miss a call, are my coworkers or is my leader not going to think that I'm working? So if you do miss a call, just understand that and make sure your employees understand that it's okay. We understand that you might have distractions. You might have other things you're taking care of the day. You might not be available at all times. It's just that you still are expected to work from 8 to 5. Another aspect that would be important in any setting, but also is more important today, is setting meetings with agendas. It's pretty agreeable that virtual and Zoom meetings are less effective slightly than in-person meetings. As Jim mentioned, you could start on mute. When people talk over each other, you can't really understand either one of them. So having agendas to make sure these meetings stay on time and on topic are something that's going to help employees feel like their time is valued. So we've touched on how a virtual setting brings us challenges of employee engagement. Work is a really big part of our individual, community, and candidates and employees want to feel like they're part of something or going to be a part of something that's bigger than themselves. But it's really easy to get lost in a virtual setting. And you could go from seeing someone every day and chatting up with them to go weeks without interacting with them. So to help combat this, regular check-ins are vital for employee engagement and to help them feel like they are valued and part of an organization. It doesn't have to be something extensive. Most of you might have something that already looks like this with a weekly one-on-one, and it doesn't have to take an hour. It can be, hey, every Tuesday morning, I just want 10 minutes of your time, see how your week went, and see if there's anything I can help you with. These scheduled check-ins are expected, but what employees will feel makes them more an employee is those casual check-ins. Before, in an office setting, you have those hallway interactions where you cross paths and you ask, hey, how was your weekend? How was that trip you took? How's your family doing? And now, unfortunately, that is no longer organic. So having these casual check-ins to just say, hey, I have 10 minutes before this meeting starts, I might as well give my coworker a call, see how they're doing. We haven't talked in a while. But with this, it's also important to note that kind of anxiety if you did miss a call. And if it was purely just a check-in call, make sure to send a note afterwards. Say, hey, I was just looking to catch up. Let me know if you have time this afternoon. Before in an office setting, we wouldn't give a whole lot of thought to these interactions, but now in order to form a connection with our teams and with our coworkers, we really have to be intentional here. Loneliness, before the pandemic, it was always known that it was the number one complaint of remote work. And the prime example of this is how employee assistance programs utilization has skyrocketed since the beginning of COVID. So during training and onboarding, it's important to make sure that your new employees are aware of an EAP if you have one, and then also make sure that your current employees are aware of it if you haven't done that already. Something that's a little difficult to maintain in a virtual environment is traditions. For example, we recently celebrated an anniversary as an organization, and normally we'd gather in the office, have food, play games, and unfortunately, that wasn't really possible this year. So we made a modification and set aside time on everyone's calendar on Friday at 4:00, and gathered virtually via Teams and played a quiz game on the company history. Jim will tell you it was a great hit. But just these little modifications that could also work in benefit for some people who might have to get home to their kids normally. Now they can at least tune in for a few minutes. So it's just important to remember that relationships and trust among your team and your organization are built over time through mutual interest. It's just that in today's environment, we have to be a little more intentional with how we do so.
Yeah, we did have a trivia game for our anniversary. It was an anniversary of the company, and it was a blast. It was so much fun. I mentioned we've been around for 18 years. I'm the only person who's been here the whole time. So I was putting my money on me to win this Gibson Consultants trivia game. Not only did I not win, I came in third. But it was a great time and it was fun. And most importantly, it achieved what Matthew talked about. It really brought us together, even though we were sitting in front of a computer screen. In summing up, I just want to hit a couple of high points that you may have picked up on. Everybody's home life is different. Some people have 4 working adults in one room. Some people have little children running around needing to be homeschooled. Some people have both of those things. So it requires empathy. It requires flexibility. You want to be consistent with how you treat people, but you do want to be able to be flexible and understand that their environment at home might not be as conducive to being productive as yours is. But you trust them. Trust goes a long way. Kind of like what Matthew was talking about when somebody is not there when a call comes in. I'm not thinking you're goofing off. I'm trusting you to do your work. Trust really goes a long way when combined with that flexibility. And like always, but especially now, maintain your sense of humor. Don't ever lose your sense of humor. If you treat your employees well through this ordeal, if you've been treating your employees well through this ordeal, it really will go far. That's pretty much the end of our formal presentation.
All right, well,
This
thank
may
you.
be a good time to open up for questions, conversations from the audience, or any kind of ad hoc things that you all may want to add. Particularly, what are some of your areas of focus that may be unique to special needs plans? And I'll start with one question. You know, you've had some great outlines of recruiting in general, but how do you find subsets of people with unique experience or unique knowledge, such as someone who would work in a special needs plan, whether it's regulatory or in a leadership role or customer service? How do you find that expertise?
I'll take a crack at that one. That is really the fundamental reason that we're structured along functional verticals. Having Matthew focus just on compliance positions and compliance careers, or having Trey do the same thing with quality reporting and risk adjustment, gives us two advantages. One is the subject matter. So when Trey is talking to somebody about risk adjustment, he understands what's being talked about. That subject matter could make the average person's head spin, but Trey's in it all day long and he understands it. The other thing that it does is enables you to penetrate the candidate pool better. So all day long, every day, all Trey is talking to is people that are in risk adjustment and quality reporting. So how we find those people that have specific narrow needs for an SMP plan is not really any different than the general recruitment process, but it is a function of we already know most of them and we understand the subject matter.
And realizing it is a smaller pool than some of the other more broad recruiting activities. And so having that knowledge base of knowing most of them, I think, is very, very important. What kinds, and kind of an open-ended question, because you did talk about the importance of onboarding, bringing new people on, particularly in these times of COVID. What kinds of support do you, after you've identified a candidate, you brought them in, help with a connection, they're hired, how do you help the organization in supporting that person in the transition? And I'm thinking about Gibson Consultants specifically. You gave us some really good outlines of what the organization needs to do, but I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about what you folks do.
Trey, Matthew, one of you want to take that?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, when transitioning and when we're working with both the candidate and the employees, we can play as big of a role or as small of a role as our clients ask of us as far as that transition period is concerned. So whether that be, of course, we're typically the liaison between the candidates, handling all the scheduling, making sure all the stars align and dots align. When say a candidate's leaving another organization and it requires a 2 weeks notice, we want to make sure all those boxes are checked. Make sure prepare them for a counter offer. All of these things. What's their bonus package payout timeline? Is that going to interfere with them accepting? And then as far as the onboarding process is concerned, just continuing to be there and be an extra line of communication for them, helping address any concerns and being that liaison between the client and the candidate.
And one of the things that is often overlooked is the most dangerous point in the process is the point between when the candidate accepts an offer and resigns and then starts with the new organization. That is when buyer's remorse might creep in. That is when somebody might be vulnerable. Colleagues all of a sudden see that get the word out either through the network or see through a change in LinkedIn title and company. I didn't even know you were in the market. Boy, you could come work for us. We could use a guy like. So staying close to the candidate after she accepts the job and resigns is so critical, and not just until they report for work, but after that as well. Because as we said earlier, it's all about empathy, putting yourself in their position and understanding they need to have their hand held figuratively to make sure that they feel like they're part of the new organization.
Yeah, and particularly when things are at such a distance. I know we've all gone through transition steps because everyone, I mean, it's rare to just have one position for your entire career. So transitions happen. And you're right, that's a very vulnerable time. It's also, I think, very vulnerable once the new hire is on board and not yet well connected or cemented within the fiber and the DNA and the culture of the organization, and particularly now when that is such a more significant challenge. I'm going to pause because I can talk and talk and talk, and I want to make sure if anyone in our audience has questions. One last question, and then we can wrap things up or see if the audience has more. We are also going through a time of mergers and acquisitions, and in all industries, when there are mergers and acquisitions, there are staff that are not brought into that new entity. What is good advice for those who, for no fault of their own or for reasons that they did not predict, are all of a sudden now they have either no role or a very temporary role? What advice do you give to them other than they should call you?
Matthew, you want to take a crack at that?
Well, I was going to say, Jim, you wrote an article for his talk, I believe, on this very matter. So I was going to give you first crack at it.
I did write an article for his talk, and it's on my LinkedIn profile. I wrote it back in, I think it was March, or not March, it was probably April and May. But I gave some practical pointers about how to find a new job, whether it's COVID related or not, whether you're laid off or whether you just want to move on. And we get these calls. I probably have 2 or 3 conversations a week with people that are asking the same question. And we don't have time to get into it. And I'm happy to share information with anybody offline that's interested in delving more into this. But generally speaking, if I had to kind of sum it up, I tell people, take ownership of your job search. There's so much information available between company websites and LinkedIn and trade show pages. Put your personal branding together first. Figure out what are the 2 or 3 things, maybe it's 1, that you can really do and really be happy doing. Figure out the companies that you can hit on. Again, think about what we talked about earlier in this presentation. The country is open to you. A lot of places are hiring people no matter where they live. So you have a much bigger pool of places that you can try. Put together a list of people that you can find on LinkedIn or on company websites that you want to hit on. Put together some well-crafted, achievement-oriented outreaches. And I recommend that you contact them, take ownership of your search. And ironically, I tell people probably one of the last things you want to do is come to somebody like me, because most recruiters that I know at any given point in time are working on a handful of searches. And so it's kind of hit or miss. But with so much out there that's about that you have the ability to take ownership of it, it's a process that works well if you view it as a job in itself. But I'm happy to share more offline if anybody's interested.
Fantastic, thank you. And if I get any follow-up questions, I will certainly forward them. So any last thoughts, comments from the audience or from anybody from Gibson Consulting? I want to thank you for your time and your insights. And we know this is a challenge both for people who are looking for positions, people who have recently just lost positions, and our members who are trying to hire the right person for the right position. So my background is I'm a clinician, and I know when it's time to look for a specialist because I'm a primary care provider. So in the same way, I think you guys provide a specialty service that can add that strength and ability for an organization. So thank you. And thank you for reaching out to us. And with that, I think we'll capture a few more minutes, and I'm going to go shovel snow. So there we go.
Thank you, Cheryl. Enjoy that.
Guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.